that's why we say, history is a lie. How did William Shakespeare, famous English poet, playwright, and actor, describe himself in the early 1600s? From the Autobiography of Shakespeare, a fragment, page 57 and 58, quote, "I had some good and dear and trusty friends in London, and made merry with them for nigh to a week together. There were Ben Jonson, a witty and scholarly and a merry rogue, who was very close to my heart, and John England, an honest man, and Edward England, as honest as John, but shy and pale, and Edward Sholton, he who bought my third play, and Will Shakespeare. That was I, a small, dark man with great eyes, whom the women loved not a little, but who loved them not too much, and who was not seldom called the little Jew boy, or the little Jew from the Midland counties, which made me to fume with anger, for I knew not then, as I did afterwards, that my grandfather, Thomas the Little of Utrecht in Holland, had been born a Jew." In this autobiography, Shakespeare describes himself as a small, dark man. He speaks of his younger years when he was called a Jew boy, and reflects upon this, filling him with rage, because he didn't know he was actually of Jewish descent, his grandfather being a Sephardic Jew from Holland, what we call today the Netherlands. We have covered in previous videos that Jews in Europe were mostly from Spain and Portugal, and were described being very dark of complexion. This time I will provide another piece of literature pointing to this fact. From the Detroit Jewish News, Friday, December 5th, 1969. Quote, "Fascinating. Mulatto Jew's story in Marcus' new work. In 1668, Boston reported the arrival and arrest of a Jew named Solomon. He was caught in the town of Wenham, Mass, on his way to New Hampshire and Maine. His crime, he had profaned the Lord's Day by traveling on a Sunday. Who was Solomon? All we know is that he was described as a mulatto Jew. But was he actually a mulatto? The Englishmen of that day thought of the Jews as a dark-skinned people. In 1665, 3 years before Solomon was hauled before the magistrates in Wenham, a respectable Portuguese Jew on Jamaica, a landowner, was referred to as a black Jew. Tawny people were dark-skinned. Benjamin Franklin believed that most of the world was tawny, and he included in the category not only Africans, Asians, and American Indians, but also Italians, French, Russians, Swedes, and all the Germans except the Saxons. The Saxons and the English, he wrote in 1751, are the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. End quote. This newspaper makes us question our previous understanding of the word swarthy, as it says tawny people were dark-skinned. We believed, based on this definition on this etymological dictionary published in the early 1700s, that swarthy was a word used to describe a range of melanated skin tones, tawny and dusky meaning light brown and brown, while black or dark meaning a dark brown complexion. However, these words don't seem to be representing a spectrum. They are, in fact, synonymous. They mean the same thing, meaning a swarthy person is simply someone with a dark complexion. The amount of European monarchs and nobles described as swarthy is astonishing. We intend to make videos about all of them, so stay tuned for those. Anyway, back to Shakespeare. Shakespeare's grandfather, being a Jew from Holland, presents us with the perfect opportunity to continue the story of the Iberian black Jews after the exile. From The Jews and Moors in Spain, page 218, quote, "Many of the Portuguese Jews settled, became prosperous in the Indies, in southern France, and in Hamburg. Others settled in the Netherlands, and became especially prosperous in Holland. From Holland, large numbers of the descendants of the Portuguese and Spanish exiles entered England through the intercession of Manasseh ben Israel with Oliver Cromwell. We just read how William Shakespeare's grandfather, Thomas of Utrecht, was a Jew from Holland. That's why I assumed he was a Sephardi Jew. which gives more context to William Shakespeare describing himself as dark. But it still doesn't explain why he used to get angry when he was nicknamed Jew Boy. The reason being a dark-complexioned Englishman would find it very offensive if he was called a Jew simply due to complexion, because it also implied they were not Christian. The comparison doesn't make it justice because it lacks the religious component, but in our times it would be like calling a Japanese person Chinese boy, simply because they have similar phenotypes. Like and share for more lost history. And that's why we say history is a lie.